Just went into a courtyard, sat down with them. There was all this kind of incense and stuff sort of floating around.
In the 1970s, Led Zeppelin was the biggest rock band in the world. They filled massive stadiums, sold millions of records, and seemed like they could do anything. Jimmy Page played guitar like a wizard, and Robert Plant sang with a voice that could shake the heavens. To their fans, they looked like the perfect partnership. But behind all the fame and success, there was a different story, one full of arguments, power struggles, and hurt feelings that would eventually tear the band apart. From the very beginning, there were problems between Jimmy Page and Robert Plant that most people never saw. Jimmy Page was the one who started Led Zeppelin. He put the band together, wrote most of the music, and made all the important decisions about how their songs should sound. Page was like the boss of the band, and he expected everyone else, including Robert Plant, to follow his ideas without question. But Robert Plant wasn't the kind of person who liked being told what to do. He was the singer, the one the crowds came to see, and he wanted to have more say in the band's music and direction. Plant had his own ideas about what their songs should be like, but Page often ignored them or said no. This made Plant angry and frustrated. He felt like he was just there to sing the words that Page wanted, instead of being a real partner in creating the music. When they were recording albums like Houses of the Holy and Physical Graffiti, these disagreements became even worse. Plant would suggest changes to songs or want to write lyrics that were more personal to him, but Page would refuse. Page wanted to keep making the same kind of mystical, blues-based rock music that had made them famous. Plant, however, wanted to try new things and grow as an artist. Every time they worked together, there were arguments and compromises that neither man was happy with. During their live concerts, the problems became even more obvious. Page would play long guitar solos that went on for many minutes, while Plant had to stand on stage with nothing to do except wait for his turn to sing again. The fans loved Page's guitar playing, but Plant felt like he was being pushed aside and forgotten. He was supposed to be the front man of the band, but in reality, Page was the one with all the power. Plant often felt like a second-class member of his own band. Page and their manager, Peter Grant, made all the important decisions about tours, album releases, and even what songs they would play at concerts. Plant was expected to show up and perform, but his opinions didn't seem to matter much. This treatment made him feel bitter and resentful, especially since the fans saw him as one of the most important parts of Led Zeppelin's success. Everything changed in 1977 when something terrible happened to Robert Plant. His 5-year-old son, Karak, died suddenly from a stomach virus. Plant was completely devastated by this loss. The grief was so overwhelming that he couldn't think about anything else, including music. The rock and roll lifestyle that had once excited him now seemed meaningless and empty. All he wanted was to step away from the spotlight and take time to mourn his son properly. Jimmy Page's reaction to Plant's tragedy showed just how different these two men really were. While Plant was dealing with the worst thing that could happen to a parent, Page was mainly concerned about keeping Led Zeppelin going. He couldn't understand why Plant would want to take a break from the band, even for something as serious as the death of his child. Page saw Led Zeppelin as his life's work, something that was more important than any personal problems. His cold response to Plant's grief hurt Plant deeply and made their relationship even worse. Plant never forgot how Page acted during this difficult time. It made him realize that Led Zeppelin had never really belonged to him. It was Page's band, and Plant was just there to help make Page's vision come true. This understanding filled Plant with anger and resentment. For the first time, he didn't just want to leave the band, he wanted to destroy it completely. While Plant was struggling with his personal loss, Jimmy Page was dealing with his own serious problem. He had become addicted to heroin, and the drug was affecting everything about his life and his music. Some nights, Page could still play guitar brilliantly, creating the magical sounds that had made him famous. But other nights, he could barely stand up or hold his instrument. The other band members never knew which version of Page would show up for rehearsals or concerts. Page's drug problem wasn't his only issue. He had also become obsessed with the occult and black magic. He bought a mansion called Boleskine House that had once belonged to Aleister Crowley, a famous practitioner of dark magic. Rumors spread that Page was performing strange rituals in the house and surrounding himself with symbols and books about supernatural powers. Some people thought this was just Page trying to create a mysterious image for himself, but others worried that he was getting involved in something truly dangerous. Robert Plant, who had always been more interested in spiritual matters in a positive way, was disturbed by Page's fascination with dark magic. The atmosphere around Page had become creepy and uncomfortable. Plant began to feel like the band wasn't just about making music anymore. It had become about power, control, and things that made him uneasy. This was another reason why Plant wanted to get away from Led Zeppelin. By 1980, the situation had become impossible to fix. When their drummer John Bonham died from drinking too much alcohol, Led Zeppelin officially broke up. But even after the band ended, the problems between Page and Plant continued. Page desperately wanted to get the band back together and recapture their former glory. He kept suggesting reunion tours and new albums, hoping to convince Plant to return to Led Zeppelin, but Plant had no interest in going backward. He had spent years feeling trapped and controlled by Page, and he didn't want to experience that again. Plant wanted to move forward with his own music career, creating songs that reflected who he was as a person, not just as Page's singing partner. Every time Page suggested a reunion, Plant said no, which Page saw as a betrayal of their shared history. Page's problems with other people weren't limited to his relationship with Plant. He also had conflicts with John Paul Jones, the band's bass player and keyboard player. Jones had always been in the background while Page and Plant got most of the attention and credit for the band's success. When Page and Plant did some projects together in the 1990s, they didn't even invite Jones to participate. This was a huge insult to Jones, who had been just as important to Led Zeppelin's sound as the other two. In the early 2000s, Page tried to work with a band called the Black Crowes, but that collaboration also ended badly. Page was used to being in complete control of his musical projects, and he couldn't compromise or share creative decisions with the other musicians. His need to dominate every aspect of the music-making process made it impossible for him to work well with others. Legal problems also followed Page for many years. Several lawsuits claimed that he had stolen parts of songs from other musicians and used them in Led Zeppelin's hits without giving credit or payment to the original artists. These accusations damaged Page's reputation and forced him to spend time and money defending himself in court instead of focusing on making new music. Perhaps the saddest part of Jimmy Page's story is how isolated he became in his personal life. While millions of fans around the world loved his music, Page struggled to maintain close relationships with family and friends. His secretive nature and addiction problems created barriers that kept people at a distance. The man who could command the attention of thousands of concertgoers found himself alone in his private life. Today, Led Zeppelin is still remembered as one of the greatest rock bands ever, but the personal costs of their success were enormous. Robert Plant and Jimmy Page occasionally appear together at public events and say polite things about each other, but the old wounds have never really healed. For Plant, Led Zeppelin represents both the best and worst times of his life, a period of incredible musical achievement that was also filled with frustration and sadness. For Page, the band remains the defining accomplishment of his entire life, something he has never been able to move beyond or replace. The story of Led Zeppelin shows that even the most successful artistic partnerships can hide deep problems and conflicts. What looked like a perfect collaboration from the outside was actually a relationship filled with power struggles, personal tragedies, and fundamental disagreements about what the band should be. Plant and Page created some of the most beloved rock music of all time, but they paid a heavy personal price for that success. Now that Robert Plant has begun to speak more openly about these old conflicts, fans can finally understand the complete story of Led Zeppelin. It's a story that's both inspiring and sad, a reminder that great art often comes from struggle, and that even legends are just human beings dealing with the same kinds of problems that affect everyone else. The music they made together will live forever, but the friendship between these two talented men was another casualty of fame, addiction, and the inability to compromise.